Out of the trilogy of TimeSplitters titles, perhaps unsurprisingly, it's the series' maiden outing which has aged the worst. Back in the year 2000, when I picked it up with my PlayStation 2 on launch day, I was very impressed by its arcade stylings, zany characters, and varied settings. Playing it in the present, I spent much of my time teetering on the edge of a nervous breakdown, as I desperately tried to navigate a campaign that was, alarmingly often, deeply unfair. TimeSplitters was the first game produced by Free Radical, a studio founded in 1999 and made up mostly of former Rare developers. Many had previously worked on two of the best console first-person shooters ever made, GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, as well as a wealth of other franchises still popular to this day, including Battletoads, Donkey Kong, and Killer Instinct. With their first release planned to be a PlayStation 2 launch title, they had their work cut out getting something ready for day one, but incredibly, they managed to get to grips with the new hardware and put together TimeSplitters in only 16 months. We must also remember that the PlayStation 2 was a tricky console to develop for, making what Free Radical achieved over such a short space of time all the more admirable. For an experience developed at pace by a new studio who had to adapt to hardware they'd never worked with before, in many ways TimeSplitters is genuinely impressive. It featured dual analog aiming when such controls were not commonly used. Its graphics were a cut above anything seen on the PlayStation, Nintendo 64 or Sega Saturn previously, and every level had its own cartoony, unique atmosphere and aesthetic, something Free Radical would build on brilliantly across TimeSplitters 2's sequels, with every mission offering up period-appropriate weapons and a pair of playable characters to choose from.
Cheers!
There's also the multiplayer, which I'll get to shortly. Released when some were still questioning whether consoles had any chance of competing with PC in the first-person shooter space, the game was an early indicator that the tide was slowly beginning to turn. It's really important to keep that context in mind when discussing TimeSplitters, as playing it nowadays, you may struggle to understand why it was ever thought to be cutting edge, even on console. Its campaign consists of 9 levels, with 3 new ones unlocked when you complete the previous trio, with every set including a mission set in the past, near present, and future. During each, you have to blast your way through fairly linear environments, secure an objective at their end, and then escape back to either the start or a location nearby. As you hurry to the exit, fearsome time-travelling aliens known as TimeSplitters spawn in to stop you, meaning you're never truly safe even when an area has been cleared of regular enemies. Most missions can be finished in 5 to 10 minutes, or less if you're playing on easy, which shortens several of them, and I completed the campaign in an hour or so on normal difficulty prior to making this video. The campaign is relentlessly basic, and while some might use the defense, "Come on, it was still pretty decent for its time," I'm not sure that excuse holds water. Halo Combat Evolved released 1 year later on Xbox and is the vastly superior title, and there were plenty of better PC shooters already on the market. Hell, I'd go so far as to argue that GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, projects many of the development team had previously worked on, provided a considerably more nuanced single-player experience. TimeSplitters' campaign is in my mind a proof of concept. A lot of what you see in its fantastic follow-ups are present, the range of settings, weapons and characters, its aesthetic and the like, but Free Radical didn't quite have the time to take full advantage of those ingredients. You need only look at TimeSplitters 2 and Future Perfect for evidence of this. The series' building blocks had been put in place during the development of the original, which meant the team were then able to focus on crafting compelling single-player content to complement them. In addition to how short the campaign is, it is absurdly brief, and how basic its structure is, it is very basic, its breathtaking difficulty should also be acknowledged. Even on normal difficulty, it's likely you will get your ass kicked a good few times due to how ludicrously unfair the game's design can often be. The stress comes in many different forms depending on which level you're playing. Tomb and Cyberden, for example, are downright confusing, with their samey environments making it tough to create a mental map on the fly. You might be able to make it to the Ankh or cyborg plans you need, but getting away without getting lost is another matter entirely. Planet X and Spaceway may be easier to navigate, however the ridiculous number of enemies which spawn both in front and behind you, an issue prevalent elsewhere to a lesser degree in other missions as well, adds a different type of frustration to the mix. If I had a nickel for every time I unexpectedly got shot in the back, I'd probably have like 13 nickels. All of these nuisances are but minor inconveniences though compared to Mansion, the worst of the bunch by a country mile. It is anger-inducing to the extent words barely do it justice, with so many different issues combining to make playing it the gaming equivalent of punching yourself in the crotch. Very, very hard. A lot of the problems I'm about to outline are present in other missions too, but during Mansion they're particularly terrible. There are plenty of zombies who only die when their heads are blown off, a nightmarishly difficult thing to do, especially during frantic periods, thanks to TimeSplitters' lack of a crosshair unless you use its aiming mode. Unfortunately, its aiming mode is awful, with the crosshair constantly trying to wrestle itself back to the centre of the screen. You can opt not to use it and put your trust in TimeSplitters' greatly overpowered bullet magnetism instead, but it's unreliable at best when aiming for the head. Many of the monsters you encounter also wield shotguns, which can take off a third or more of your health with a single shot. Often they are hidden around corners or come at you in pairs, making it almost a certainty that you'll take massive amounts of damage if you let your guard down even for a second. It's also the longest level, which means you need to be laser focused from beginning to end. Worst of all are the constant gotcha moments where enemies spawn in horrendous locations and melt you instantly. I got through Mansion after more attempts than I care to admit due to repetition. Eventually I knew where every enemy was going to be, but getting to that stage was about as enjoyable as being eaten alive by an actual zombie. Mixed in with the trauma, there are some highlights too. Chinese is a cracking affair as you work your way around the outside of a restaurant, clear it out, and then head through its kitchen into the basement where a nondescript bag you need awaits. Its music, that playing right now, is particularly brilliant, a tune I remembered in full the instant I heard it some 20 years after last playing TimeSplitters. It's my favourite ditty in the game, and many kudos should be given to series composer Graham Norgate, as his work across the entire franchise is stellar. Another I especially enjoyed was Village, a Lovecraft-inspired firefight in a fishing hamlet full to the brim with mutants. It is exactly the right length, it's creepy, and difficulty-wise it strikes about the perfect balance. The biggest problem with TimeSplitters' campaign is that everything I've spoken about so far, its structure, length, and all the small annoyances, is that they end up encouraging two specific playstyles. Each is a viable extreme, with the middle ground between them regrettably less feasible. On the one hand, speed is encouraged. Racing through levels as fast as you can, barely engaging any enemies at all, is a viable strategy in and of itself, and with many unlocks gated behind achieving a certain time on a certain difficulty, it's a rewarding one too. On the other, being cautious and edging slowly forwards, picking off those who block your path, is best for those struggling with the janky aiming system and some very nasty enemy spawns, which I'd guess will be the majority. What you really want in an arcade-style shooter like TimeSplitters is to incentivize a playstyle which is in between them. You should not be punished for doing what is most fun, that is diving in and figuring things out on the fly using an assortment of period-appropriate weapons against period-appropriate foes. If you decide to do that, however, you will absolutely feel TimeSplitters' wrath. You will be surrounded, your health bar will evaporate in an instant, and you'll quickly come to realise you are playing a game which values memorisation more than anything else. If you wish to be successful, repeat playthroughs and a knowledge of when and where aggressors are, or will soon be, is key, as is awareness of the locations of the few health and armour pickups on offer. Some might enjoy this trial and error approach to gameplay, but for me it removes a lot of the joy first-person shooting so often brings me. When success relies on knowing where enemies will be so you can shoot them before they have a chance to react, any sense of improvisation evaporates, as does any opportunity for expression. One thing I've not yet touched on is TimeSplitters' story, and to that I say, what story? Why save the best till last when you can save the non-existent till last, with the campaign having the same level of narrative intrigue as my last bowel movement? There is no interesting time travel tale which ties everything together, nor is there any characterization beyond these admittedly entertaining introductions.
Okay, we leave.
There is not a single cinematic, there is not a single line of meaningful dialogue. You just jump into a level, shoot stuff, and then continue on your merry way. TimeSplitters 2 and Future Perfect greatly improve on this side of things, and thank goodness they do. What makes the lack of a narrative even stranger is that the arcade mode challenges unlocked after finishing the campaign do each come with a small blurb explaining them, who the Timesplitters are and why you have to secure various objects scattered across different time periods. Both remain a mystery. Why you're hunting ducks at a dock or have to punch 50 zombies' heads off is still pretty unclear, but at least you're given something. These challenges are tremendously tough when playing alone, like the campaign, and although they are as shallow as can be, they are a means of unlocking more stuff for the multiplayer, and so are worth your while trying out. TimeSplitters' campaign and its arcade challenges were fine in 2000, but they've not aged altogether brilliantly. In fact, I wouldn't recommend anyone really bother playing them when its two sequels surpass them in every conceivable way. When it comes to TimeSplitters' multiplayer, well, actually I'd say the same thing, but not for the same reason. TimeSplitters multiplayer was pretty far ahead of all its console rivals when it released, and I am going to spend some time talking about why, as it's important it be acknowledged. I'd only avoid returning to it in the present, as 2 and Future Perfect essentially offer the same experience, but with so many more options. But enough about them, let's talk about how full to the gills with options TimeSplitters multiplayer was. If you wanted to play the campaign with a friend, you could. If you wanted to play the arcade mode with a friend, you could. If you wanted to play the multiplayer modes not just with one friend, but with 3, you could. That last one in particular is pretty incredible considering how action-packed matches can be, with Free Radical managing some kind of sorcery to get 4-player split screen working on hardware that was, at the time, so new. If you're Billy No Mate, like I was when revisiting the multiplayer, apologies, no split screen footage for you here, or you and your mates want some extra cannon fodder, you can also add bots to the mix. Bots weren't anything new to the FPS genre in general, many PC titles already included the option, but I can't remember playing anything on console prior to TimeSplitters which featured them. I am by no means saying it was the first console game to have bots, but it was at the very least extremely uncommon at the time. They are very stupid even when set to their highest intelligence level, but the fact they were functional at all on console is pretty amazing. You can also customize almost everything precisely to your needs. There are a ton of different modes, including your standard deathmatch, capture the bag, capture the flag by another name, and escort, a personal favourite of mine in which you have to protect a bot from taking damage. Your friends and any bots can be split into a max of 4 teams, and you can choose their skill level and appearance, the bots, not your friends, with the weapons up for grabs also being completely up to you. If you're lazy, there are also lots of preset character and weapon sets to choose from as well. Add to that an excellent selection of maps, cheats and other options to keep things interesting, or completely bonkers depending on what settings you use, and what you get was what was the most generous multiplayer package available on console upon the game's release. And I've not even mentioned the map maker yet either. Yes, that's right, you can even create your own maps and choose where they're set from a selection of Gothic, Industrial, Alien, Spaceport and Virtual. An intuitive tiling system makes creating your level's layout as easy as pie, which is particularly impressive considering it's all done using a PlayStation 2 controller. You also decide where weapons and power-ups are placed, as well as how areas are lit, which is perhaps the most surprising feature. I never got into making maps myself until TimeSplitters 2 arrived, as that one let you create story missions, but I'd imagine there were many gamers who spent many hours building the perfect map for them and their friends to frag out in. It's yet another example of why TimeSplitters, in multiplayer terms, stood head and shoulders above its rivals when it first hit store shelves. A phrase I mentioned earlier was proof of concept, and it is a vital one when discussing TimeSplitters, as that is very much what I consider the game to be. That becomes most clear when comparing its campaign to the series' later entries. To be kind, the original is bare bones, with it lacking the structure, story and level design which would make its follow-ups so successful. In multiplayer terms, TimeSplitters was a trendsetter, but even so, it's hard to recommend revisiting in a world where 2 and Future Perfect exist. That's to take nothing away from Free Radical though. With the time they had available to develop their first title and the new hardware they had to work with, it's a valiant first attempt which laid the foundations for the wonderful work that followed. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and time warriors. If you had the time of your life, do consider liking, subscribing and letting me know what you think of TimeSplitters, and hopefully we'll hang out again soon.